So the next aspect of the Lean Sigma is about learning. And so this is, how do I find my strategic advantages in terms of my marketing? What do I go after? Square one. The thing to think about your growth in marketing is buckets. And each of these buckets are only so big of a particular type of customer. And so when you fill up the bucket, then what do you go on to next? And naturally, your beginning buckets are pretty easy to fill. You get a pretty good percentage of those, but then how do you go about crossing the cabin? And one thing about you as a company, a lot of people tend to look at only details. And as you look at your book, Breva and all, this is why I have you read it. It's a perspective looking at things more in the larger picture and how things connect and how you can find value in that. And then finally, the last part of it is Reese talks about build, measure, and learn. The thing about a lot of what Reese does is it's more geared towards software than physical products. There's more than one way of going about doing these things. And so measuring faster, if you notice, they're all geared towards software and digital marketing, and you may not be doing that. In the first lecture, Dr. Cho talked about his technique, which he calls on the road. And so when I get started, then it's my issue of, can I get money to even get started, which is a ditch of death. Then that money gets me to my alpha. And so I reach the valley of death. Can I actually get to a beta? And especially in physical products, people underestimate it. The thing is, once I do get to my beta, normally they show this nice, J-curve growing up, and instead it's more bumpy like that. And the reason why is you can run into the fog. And the fog is when you don't grow evenly. And when you don't grow evenly, you run into trouble. And those ripples are your pivots. The first thing hardly ever works. It's things come out where you have no idea where they come out. And then finally you get into the knee of the curve, you take off. But even then, you hit ripples in the knee for the simple reason that you're filling buckets. And then you fill buckets and you have to bring on new buckets. So it's not that smooth. You scale and grow. And the thing about harvesting is you can harvest anywhere once you hit beta. And you can potentially harvest at alpha if it's considered to be a hot enough technology. Naturally, the further along you are in the curve, the more money you can make. And so here's an example of going down that curve. And so we start with an idea. And so the idea is a closed loop drug pump. And the basic idea is that if you look at electronic pumps in hospitals, those pumps have over 1,000 parts to it, and a lot of those parts are finely machined. And the way a pump works is that every time there's a stroke of a motor, you get a fixed volume, which is called a bolus. So if my bolus is 1 cc, if I only let one of those out a minute, then I've got 1 cc per minute. And if I double the rate, then I have 2 cc's per minute. And that's how they get flow rate, but they actually don't measure it. So Dr. Cho came up with this idea of making a low-cost flow sensor. Instead of measuring boluses, measure the actual flow that goes into the body. Then I can integrate over time and I can actually get the actual volume delivered. The thing is, flow is a very, very difficult problem to solve, and Dr. Cho solved it. And so I did something that I excelled at. After you have your idea, now you have to put some thought into it. And you plan with your team. And then you think, who am I going to sell to? And so this is where you do your segmentation and sub-profiles. So the ones in green, we thought these are the low-hanging fruit. This is this is who we're going to go after. And then we run through our financials, see if we can make money. And so Dr. Cho has a lot of experience and cost of sensors, so he figured out where the price breaks were going to be, what the cost of these sensors were going to be, and how much we could sell it for. And so we found out, yes, we can make money at this as long as we can get very high volumes. We looked at our competition, and we figured our competition can come after us because they already had an investment in technology. or they just didn't have the resources to take on this kind of project. And so we file patents to protect ourselves and our equipment, and then we looked at the differences. Do we sell to other businesses, or do we go straight to the consumer? And so the thing is, the further down the line you are, the more you can charge. And so this is what happens when you go out there. And that's that everybody loves it, but nobody wants to buy it. And then they want to try it first. And you have your naysayers. You have people who want two totally different things, and they're totally different products. And so for the volumes you need, they only want a piddly amount. And so all of a sudden, that's my grandson. Things aren't quite like what you expected. And the thing is, there's a lot of noise. So we were wrong and confused. What do you do? This is a tough time in a startup. You have to plow on. And then what happens, and this is what you're doing this week in the assignment, trying to find out that golden person to talk to, you see the answer. We just happened to be in the hospital, and somebody told us, hey, you want to go talk to the neonatal unit, the NICU? And it's like, what, preemie babies? Yeah. And then all of a sudden my eyes lit up, because they told me, and I did not know this, but that premature babies have 8 feedings a day. At 8 feedings a day, 40 beds, 80% capacity, all of a sudden for one hospital, we could sell 100,000 disposables. And so we went out and validated our market. We talked to the cult. The thing is, when you have a closed loop control pump like this, it's the difference between a digital watch, because now I've cut the number of parts down to 5 instead of 1,000. All of a sudden now the instrument costs $200 instead of $2,000. I have a disruption. I can pretty much cannibalize the entire market. Not only that, but it's small, it's lightweight, people liked it for different reasons. It's a solution to a lot of problems. It's an MLP, not an MVP. And so I figured out what our beachhead market was, and so we figured out the MLP, the MVP, and the total market. And so looking at what our target market is we were going to go after our top 50 hospitals that had neonates. And so our total addressable market would be all Hospira global markets. In terms of making money, it has an IRR of 158%. I mean, this is where, yeah, you can make a boatload. And so if we wanted to go alone, we would have gotten money from family and friends. And it would take at least a year to get to market. And so who am I selling to? These are the people. The thing is, the materials managers are the key decision makers, because they have the sign off. In terms of going to market, we need key influencers, and so there are certain hospitals that everybody else looks to, like Cleveland Clinic or the Mayo Clinic or something like that. We talked about promotional events and all. And so the chasm doesn't bother you because you know it's coming. So you research for it. You plan for it. Now, the Valley of Death happens between the alpha and beta stage. And the thing is, this is a trap that a lot of people in physical products run into, because you severely underestimate what it takes to complete development. So what do I do if I'm in the Valley of Death? If you know it's coming, and most entrepreneurs don't know it's coming, you avoid it, you plan and execute for it. You build in contingencies, meaning understand your value tranches, meaning you think this is a value level, but is there something else you've already created that does have value that you can show people? Bootstrap is about getting creative with your resources. I never like debt. In a lot of cases, I'd rather fold the company up than go into debt, but that's a choice you have to make. And if you don't think you can get there from here, there is such a thing called failure. And so being honest and coming to grips with reality is part of being an entrepreneur. So bootstrapping is when you find creative ways to advance a situation. It's about running as lean as possible, and one part of bootstrapping is taking on debt, and that's something you have to consider. These are some of the implications of bootstrapping, and here's some example. Fine Art America. Sean Broiler was an engineer, and he came up with this idea because he worked with his brother in an art gallery that nobody caters to artists. So he thought we could be the art business for eBay, just like eBay. And so he funded his own business with $200. By 2010, he was up to $2.5 million in revenue. I believe he sold it. Jason Ross was an Ohio State grad. He was bartending and doing odd jobs while he thought of an idea, and he came up with this idea of Jack Threads, which was flash clothing sales. And so he took his money and his personal loans, and in order to get his software, he convinced an Ohio State computer science professor to let his class build his website as a class project. And he ended up selling his company. CD Baby was about an indie music service specifically for the indie music artists. And what he did is he just kept testing and pivoting until he found a following. And he sold his company for $22 million, and he gave most of that money to charity. Because it was about the music, man. Sam Hogg, a business student at Michigan State, came up with GiftSip, which is a portal for gift cards. He funded it himself, and he did a number of different things. And he, after 2 years after launch, he sold his company. Robert Stevens was a University of Minnesota dropout, and he created a business you're probably heard of, and that's Geek Squad. And it's because he realized, you know something? People have problems with their computers. He funded himself $200, put on a white shirt and a black clip-on tie on his bicycle to fix computers. Or he was, otherwise they'd be confused for somebody who's like trying to campaign for Jesus. But anyway, he did guerrilla marketing. He actually, on his, he put a sign on the side of his car, on the soles of his shoes. He left snow imprints saying Geek Squad because he couldn't afford to be in the yellow pages. And he sold to Best Buy for $3 billion, but by 2012, Geek Squad had $1 to $1.5 billion. In the next video, we will talk about the fog.